17 years after the armistice, the first thing anyone noticed wasn't the gunfire. It was the coolant bright as liquid starlight pouring down the ribs of Sable Station. Like a wounded aurora, hissing where it touched the frost slick deck plates, the leak crawled through the docking ring in shimmering ribbons, and every alarm on the lower levels answered in a chorus of metallic panic. Traders ran. Dock hands shouted. Security drones turned their blue eyes toward shadows that didn't move the way shadows should. And in maintenance, spying see where the air smelled of ozone, lubricant. And old regretser lone mechanic tightened a seal with hands that refused to tremble. He wore a Class 3 work jacket the color of rusted bark, boots magnetized for zero grav, trusses, and gloves so patched they were mostly stitching. On his belt hung a plasma torch that didn't belong on a civilian station, military grade, outdated. Perfectly maintained like a promise never allowed to die. "Please," begged the supervisor over his shoulder, a many-eyed Thesid whose pupils flickered in frantic sequences. Dock Bay 9, the Elindri delegation just arrived. Their manifold is failing. If we don't stabilize it, they'll vent the whole bay. The mechanic didn't look up. Bay 9 is Rask's sector. Rask won't touch Elindri tech. Says it makes his first stand on end. The mechanic finished the seal, stood, and slid the wrench into his pocket with calm that looked like indifference to anyone who didn't know what it cost. "Fine," he said. He walked toward Dock Bay 9 the way a ghost might walk toward an unfinished funeral. The Elindri vessel waited behind the bay's translucent shield like a carved jewel. Arcs of crystalline alloy, surface patterns that bent the light as if the ship were remembering the shape of a star. It had once loved. Human engineers had tried for centuries to copy that elegance. Most of the attempts ended as slag. The mechanic stepped into the bay and let the sensor haze paint his visor with data. The manifold coupling was old pre-armistice design, and it bled coolant in slow, venomous breaths. "Degraded microlattice," he muttered, more to the machine than to any listener. "Impact stress from the Aster Vale corridor. Needs a replacement seal." A voice behind him answered with measured clarity, layered with harmonics that made every syllable sound like it had been sung once, long ago. "Our schedule requires departure in 2 hours." He turned. The Elindri Diplomat stood framed by the bay lights, tall, luminous skin the deep green of ocean glass. Silver hair falling in soft waves, eyes bright and metallic like mercury catching dawn. Bioluminescent markings traced her cheekbones and throat-living constellations that shifted with her breath. Her robe white and pale metallic signaled a rank that made dock workers suddenly remember places they needed to be. "I can do it faster," the mechanic said, returning to the manifold, "but not unsafe." That was not a question, the diplomat replied. It was an observation. She stepped closer, studying his hands. "Most humans refuse our service contracts." He didn't answer. Her markings pulsed, subtly brighter. "You handle Elindri systems like someone trained in their principles. Like someone who knows the difference between mechanism and intention." I read. Interesting. Her tone held no accusation, only curiosity sharpened to a fine edge. "What else have you read? And what have you chosen not to remember?" He kept working. He fabricated a seal from station stock composites, reshaped it with heat, and seated it with the kind of pressure that suggested he could feel the lattice aligning through his fingertips. 90 minutes later, the manifold stopped bleeding. The FECID supervisor nearly collapsed with relief. The diplomat did not leave. She watched the mechanic as if he were an equation that refused to balance. "I am Sarai of the Lumen Court," she said at last, envoy of the Outer Accord. He wiped coolant from his gloves. "Just a mechanic." "Just," Sarai repeated, as though tasting the word. "A pleasure, just a mechanic." She finally turned away, robes whispering against the deck. But the feeling of her gaze stayed like frost settling in his chest. His workshop lay in a forgotten fold of the station's understructure, reachable only through service corridors that most residents never discovered. He'd paid for that privacy with years of quiet competence, and the right favors slid to the right hands. Here, among salvaged coils and half-repaired thrusters, he could pretend the universe had never asked him to choose between duty and mercy. In the corner stood a shape beneath a thermal tarp. He didn't look at it. He was recalibrating a nav module when footsteps approached to light for the supervisor, to deliberate for deliveries. "Your door was unlocked," Sarai said from the threshold. "I hope you do not mind." He set the module down slowly, carefully, like it might explode if startled. "Your ship left." "It did," she agreed. Then it returned. "Why?" Our negotiations expanded. Her eyes swept his clutter with curiosity that didn't bother to hide itself. "The administrator tells me you appeared here 17 years ago with excellent credentials and no history." He kept his face empty. "Out here, history is expensive. Indeed." Sarai drifted closer, fingers brushing an old regulator scarred by plasma scorch. "I noticed something when you repaired our manifold. Your movements follow military protocols, human field maintenance patterns. Lots of veterans become mechanics." "Yes," her gaze lifted. "But few can improvise Lindri lattice seals without reference." The air changed. The workshop felt smaller. Sarai's eyes flicked to the torch on his belt. "And fewer still carry a military plasma torch from the Wingfall cohort." His hand moved toward it before he stopped himself. Silence swelled between them. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, voice rougher than he intended. Sarai's constellations brightened with something like grief. "I have studied the war." The Wingfall cohort was known for protecting refugee corridors when doing so was unpopular. They held lines so civilians could flee. She swallowed, "Including me." His throat tightened against a memory he had spent 17 years drowning in work. "I was a child," Sarai continued. "I remember a human soldier who carried Lindri children through fire. Dark hair, eyes that looked older than he was. He kept moving even when the sky broke. That soldier died," the mechanic said. "That is what records claim." Sarai stepped toward the tarp-covered corner. "Records also claim the cohort left no remains." "Don't," he warned. She didn't stop. Her hand found the tarp's edge and drew it back. Armor stood beneath, once magnificent, now ruined. Composite plates fractured and scorched. One arm hung torn, the chest plate cratered through as if something had tried to erase the heart inside. The crest once bright was faded, a rising sun over an open hand. Sarai covered her mouth. Her markings flared, constellations in a storm. The armor of last feather, she whispered. He went very still. They said it was vaporized. Sarai said, voice trembling. They said the one who wore it was gone. Put it back, he said. You survived. The words hit like impact shock. He felt them in his bones. I watched everyone die. He snapped, anger erupting where numbness usually lived. Everyone. Friends, family by choice. People who deserved better than a crater and a footnote. I didn't save them. I just kept breathing. Sarai didn't flinch. You held the corridor, she said softly. 3,000 refugees escaped through a passage your unit kept open. Do the records show their faces? He demanded. Do they show what it sounds like when comms go quiet one voice at a time? His hands shook now, betraying him after years of discipline. I wanted to go with them, he admitted, the truth tasting like metal. But the universe didn't take me. Sarai stepped closer and placed her warm hand over his calloused fingers. I understand, she said, more than you think. They sat amid scraps and tools while she spoke. Of her side of the war, cities dissolved, families scattered into dust, treaties signed over mass graves. I became a diplomat to build bridges, Sarai said. And the person who built my first bridge has been hiding behind maintenance stores. I'm nobody, he said, as if repetition could make it real. Sarai's eyes held him. You carried 14 children through plasma fire. He looked away. She let the silence breathe, then said, there are families on Elindri Prime who still tell the story. Children named after the cohort's call signs. Not for glory, because gratitude needed a shape. He swallowed hard. That gratitude felt heavier than any blame. Sarai glanced back toward the armor. This belongs in a memorial. No, he said immediately. Her expression tightened. You think I want to parade your pain for politics? All diplomats want something, he said, too sharply. Sarai's markings pulsed with frustration and something gentler beneath it. Right now, I want to understand why someone who chose courage keeps treating survival like a crime. He stared at the floor until the truth crawled out. Because I don't remember choosing, he said. I remember fighting, then waking in an escape pod, burned and alone, with screaming in my head that didn't stop for months. I didn't decide to live. I just failed to die. Sarai touched his cheek with careful tenderness, giving him time to pull away. Guilt doesn't honor the dead, she said. It only starves the living. Before he could answer, alarms shrieked again, different tone, sharper, panicked. The workshop speaker crackled with the thesid supervisor's voice. Mechanic armed intruders. They're asking for the Elindri envoy. Sarai rose, every line of her posture turning purposeful. The Ashen Renewal, she said. Extremists from my own people. They believe peace is betrayal. They came onto a neutral station for you. They have tried for 6 months, Sarai said, as if confessing a weather report. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed your repair? He hesitated, then exhaled. No. Then it wasn't relevant, Sarai said, and there was grim humor in it. He unclipped his plasma torch and twisted its settings until they hummed deep and no longer a tool, but something that could become a weapon. How many? He asked. 8 to 12, Sarai replied. Usually. He slid a maintenance panel aside, revealing a narrow access route. Then we take the bones of the station. She stared. You mapped these. I mapped everything. He said, when you live as if someone will eventually come for you, you plan exits. They moved through hidden shafts and frost-stiff conduits. Above them, gunfire crackled. Security drones screamed warnings in 3 languages. Shadows ran. At a junction, he lifted a fist-halt and listened. Voices ahead. Elindri. Hard, angry. To guards. We can go round, Sarai whispered. Adds an hour, he said. Not an option. He glanced at her. I can drop them without killing them. It'll be loud. Sarai's eyes flashed. Do it. He moved with sudden speed, bursting through a vent panel. A stun pulse from the modified torch hit the first guard before the rifle fully rose. The second guard managed to aim, but the mechanic closed distance like a memory returning, struck a nerve cluster with precise force, and the guard crumpled, unconscious for seconds, to bodies breathing. Sarai climbed down from the vent, staring at him with a mix of awe and accusation. You could have killed them, she said. They're not my enemies, he answered. Just lost. Strange. Human, Sarai murmured. So I've been told. They slipped onward, avoiding patrols until they reached the final corridor to Dock Bay 9 and found it sealed behind. A blast door. Then the blast door opened anyway. An older Elindri stepped through, skin marked with age-dark patterns, hair cut short like an old soldier's. His bioluminescent markings formed the sigils of the wardens. A warrior caste supposedly ended after the war. His rifle tracked directly to Sarai's heart. Envoy, he said, voice cold. Your bloodline excels at surviving while others burn. Sarai stiffened. Don't. Peace with humans. The warden spat. The species that slaughtered us. The mechanic stepped half a pace forward. Humans didn't start that war. Both Elindri turned toward him, surprised he'd spoken at all. The conflict was fed. The mechanic continued, by the silent ledger merchant powers profiting. Off blame. That's in the archives. The warden's eyes narrowed. And who are you, human? A mechanic. You move like a soldier. The mechanic didn't deny it. The warden raised the rifle. Then you understand when a machine can't be repaired. What happened next was later described in incident logs as reckless heroism bordering on insanity. The mechanic stepped in front of Sarai as the warden fired. The crystalline round slammed into his shoulder. He twisted at the last fraction instinct older than grief, so it didn't take his heart. Pain exploded white-hot. Blood soaked his work jacket. He stayed standing, using the spin. He snapped his torch up and fired a tight, focused burst at the warden's rifle. The crystalline components overheated, crazed, then shattered into harmless fragments. I spent 17 years fixing what other people gave up on. The mechanic said through clenched teeth. Engines, systems, lives. He advanced. One hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, You know what I learned? He said. Nothing is truly beyond repair. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to try. The warden stared. That shot should have killed you. I've had practice, the mechanic rasped. He struck once precise, controlled, and the warden dropped, stunned and sprawled rather than dead. My name doesn't matter, the mechanic said, voice steady despite the ringing in his ears. But my unit held the corridor so your children could live. I won't let you burn the future they built. Security finally flooded the corridor, shouting orders. Drones hovered. Hands reached for restraints. Medics rushed in. Sarai was at the mechanic's side, pressing a sealant patch to his shoulder with practiced efficiency. You absolute idiot. She breathed, voice thick with something that wasn't anger. Selfless, impossible idiot. He forced a crooked smile. You still owe me for that manifold. Sarai laughed bright, startled, defiant against the chaos. Recovery took weeks. Sarai visited daily at first to discuss investigations and the Ashen renewal cell. Then she stayed to talk about quieter things, the kinds of dreams that wake survivors with lungs full of ghosts. On the 14th day, she arrived with a package wrapped in ceremonial cloth. They took this from your workshop, Sarai said softly. The extremists wanted to use it as propaganda. He unwrapped it and found the armor cleaned, stabilized, preserved, still broken, but cared for, treated with reverence. The investigators who recovered it, Sarai explained, are children of the corridor survivors. They insisted on handling it themselves. He stared at the armor until his eyes burned. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Then don't, Sarai replied, sitting beside him. Just let the truth exist. You mattered. You still do. Months passed. The workshop changed. Human tools shared bench space with Alindri diagnostic arrays. Sealants sat beside crystalline compounds. And the armor no longer hidden stood in a glass case with climate control. A plaque beneath it that read, in memory of those who held the line. May peace be the bridge their sacrifice demands. A group of students mixed species, laughing, in multiple dialects visited as part of an interspecies program. They stood before the case with wide eyes. One teenager lingered after the others drifted away. Elindri's silver hair, human brown eyes heritage braided into a single face. Excuse me, she said with formal politeness. Were you really the one they called Last Feather? The mechanic considered the question that had hunted him for 17 years. I was, he said at last, a long time ago. And now? He looked around at the workshop full of shared tools and half-built futures. Now I fix things, he said. The girl bowed an awkward blend of two cultures and hurried after her friends. Sarai stepped beside him and slid her hand into his without ceremony. Some hearts don't heal alone, she murmured. He squeezed her fingers, feeling strangely something that wasn't punishment, possibility, outside the viewport. The Aster veil drifted like painted smoke. In the station's corridors, voices of dozens of species echoed through a place that had once been only a hiding spot. And in a workshop at the edge of known space, a mechanic who had spent 17 years trying to disappear finally allowed himself to be seen not as a legend, not as a symbol, but as a person still learning how to live. Because broken things weren't always meant to stay broken. Sometimes they were waiting for time, for patience, and for someone brave enough to keep building.